The first thing you want to do when you begin to create health is make space in your day-to-day for short periods where stress resolution can take place. Because stress and decades of chronic stress that we as women leaders face becomes the biggest problem for our health. It affects literally every system in the body. And so allowing for stress resolution to happen daily is a big game changer.
Welcome to Women Leaders on the Move, a Her C-Suite Radio podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Benamou, and every week I bring you inspirational stories and insights to help you with the second half of your career, whether you're looking to land a board role, grow your business, or find what's next. Our guests have tips and insights to help you do just that. I'm also the founder of Her C-Suite, where ambitious women are meeting, engaging, and thriving in our programs, all focused around the second half of your career. I hope you will visit us at hercsuite.com. And the guest today is also a member of Women on the Move. Irina Fursman is a CEO and executive health coach at Odysseys into Wellbeing. I really enjoyed this conversation with her, and it resonated so deeply. I know it will with you too. Irina is a former corporate executive. She founded Odysseys into Wellbeing 9 years ago to help women leaders over 40 transform health to fuel life and career. She addresses health issues caused by decades of chronic stress by uncovering hidden stressors and implementing data-powered personalized care systems that help you. And she's an MBA graduate from the Chicago Booth School, and she's also a certified functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and a certified integrative nutrition health coach. You are going to get a lot out of this conversation, and most importantly, find what's the one thing that you can focus on to gain and leverage a strategic advantage with your health. Let's get started with this conversation now. Irina, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. Thank you for being on Women Leaders on the Move.
Well, thank you for having me, Natalie. I'm very excited. I've been looking forward to this, so let's do it.
Yes, we have been planning this. And so for our listeners, you are in for a treat because we are going to be talking about all the ways that you can leverage your health for strategic advantage, which I think is so amazing and really unique. But before we get to that, I always like to ask if you could share a few minutes and share a little bit about what got you into this and fascinated about it, because you've had an amazing career and you've now lasered in on this. And I'd like to know that journey.
Sure. I like to think about my career as 3 chapters. When I was first starting out, I started as a market strategy consultant at a boutique firm in Chicago called Franklin and Associate, and I was there for 8 years. I did my MBA part-time at the University of Chicago Graduate School of Business. At that point, it was called. I had a bachelor's in economics from Bryn Mawr, so that was my first phase. From there, I got very interested in healthcare and in particular the medical device industry. And so I transitioned into the corporate executive career as a global strategic planning executive. And from there, I built and ran a commercial organization for DeVilbiss Healthcare, a $100 million division of Sunrise Medical. And then from there, I sort of became an entrepreneur and worked for Barry Callebaut Innovation, reporting directly to the head of global innovation, building and managing their new ventures incubator here in the US. For about a year, I did that. And that created a platform for my third phase of my career where I became an entrepreneur. I really love the healthcare industry. In particular, I got very interested in how do we as women leaders have a strong health foundation in our 40s, 50s, and beyond. Because this is the time where all of us really think about the impact that we make on our companies, on our communities, local communities here in Chicago or wherever we are. So we think about impact. And I started to notice that as my colleagues got into their 50s, suddenly they would get a very difficult, challenging health diagnosis. At that time, I was at DeVilbiss Healthcare and I was in my late 30s. And I would start seeing this dynamic. And I started asking, well, why is this happening? And how do we prevent it from happening? And I started asking my doctor questions, and yet I wasn't getting the answers. The doctors blame it on menopause, or they blame it on aging, or they blame it on stress. And it is true that both menopause and stress and aging, all those three things are factors, but it's not fate, right? It's feedback, it's not fate. And if we listen to the feedback of the symptoms, then we can begin to understand some of the imbalances and dysfunction that are happening inside the body. And then if we really follow that and create a strong self-care foundation, really guided by data, and that's what I do in my practice with my clients, then we can turn health into a strategic advantage to magnify our impact. And so the third phase of my career, I decided to build my business. And I went on and got 3 professional certifications over the last 9 years. My business is 9 years old. So I'm a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. I'm a certified integrative nutrition health coach. And just last October, I became certified by the Metabolic Terrain Institute of Health as a terrain health advocate. So here we are.
And this resonates obviously for me and where I'm at in my life, which I think all the listeners know, but I'm not embarrassed or shy about saying that I'm in my 50s, and I started Her C-Suite in my 50s. And last year was my year of really having some health challenges like you talk about, and really needing to advocate both for my symptoms, which were being dismissed and like, don't worry about it. And it was like, no, I actually really do need to worry about this because it's cardiac related. And I think so often, if you're of a certain age demographic, you're driven, you're successful, you work hard, you have this ethic of work, super hard. And taking that pause is hard. How do you work with your clients to shift what you're thinking about? Is like, you really have to focus on your health in order to be able to deliver and have it be your strategic advantage. Because if we're not healthy,
in the ideal world, we want to create room in our life for self-care a little bit every day, or at least 3-4 days a week. We want to create some room in our life for self-care. And to me, that's really what it boils down to, is creating that space for ourselves. What happens when we don't is then at some point we may end up with a health issue or a health crisis that's much bigger, and that would require us to take some time off. It happened in my life in 2014, actually, 11 years ago. I did not have a crisis yet, thankfully, but my immune system was just really not protecting me as it should. And I was getting sick all the time. And I asked my doctor what I should do. And he just said, well, let's wait and see what happens. Well, I didn't want to wait and see. I was concerned about potentially some major problems down the road. And so I took a sabbatical for 6 months and buried myself in books and really restored my own immunity. But I didn't have any help. I had to do it on my own. And that was a pretty lonesome journey, and not something I would recommend to people, waiting and then having to put your business on hold for 6 months and having to do that. And after that, that was a big aha moment. And I said, well, this is a real unmet need for women leaders. And that's when I decided that this is going to be my purpose in life for the next phase of my career. And I enrolled at the Institute of Integrative Nutrition to become a health coach, a certified health coach.
Last year I was taking actually I started in 2023. I started taking very purposeful care because I have heart disease in my family, and it's been predicted I'll have some incident. And so I got my veins in my legs fixed. And it wasn't because of cosmetic. It was really for safety and for my health. And because people hear varicose veins and like, oh, it's a vanity thing. No, it's life saving. So I was going to this doctor and my blood pressure was really high. And they kept telling me, like, oh, you must be nervous. And I really wasn't nervous. I mean, certainly there were some bad, serious, procedures that weren't so fun, but it wasn't like I should have been at the really elevated, like over 160, right? And they just dismissed it. So for 6 months, I was seeing this doctor, and no one was saying, like, you should really go to your primary care. You should be checking this out. So by the time I got to my primary care, it was serious. And I had missed, all this ramp up time of getting diagnosed. And it's been a year of a journey of getting my blood pressure like really focused. But to your point, like if you don't take the time, that's a silent killer that nobody knows about. For me, it turned out to be sleep apnea induced, which I didn't even know. So you start on peeling the onion, but we don't know as women, like what are all the variables that could be affecting our health?
Well, it's an interesting point you bring up, Natalie, because traditionally when people talk about women's health, they think about gynecological health. The reality is when we are in their 50s, like late 40s when we approach perimenopause, in their 50s when we're going through menopause, and even postmenopause in the 60s, in that time frame, so many parts of women's health become a real priority, like cardiovascular health, metabolic health, which is directly tied to that. We're talking about bone health, right? We're talking about gut health is really important. Immune health. These are all really big, important areas of health, and they're all interrelated. There is just so much interconnectivity with that. And so all of those are components of women's health. Currently, I see quite a bit of trends in the metabolic health happening for women because believe it or not, stress and the chronic stress that we're exposed to throughout the decades of our careers when we are really out there pushing and building and creating value for our shareholders and for our companies, those decades of stress can reduce insulin sensitivity. And when they reduce insulin sensitivity, they will affect our metabolic health and potentially even put us on a path to prediabetes and later diabetes. And that is something that people don't talk about. And yet I'm seeing that more and more as a trend. And I'd like people to really stop and think for a moment that the impact of stress can be quite significant and can even affect, as I said, these types of issues for people who have no weight issues, who don't have a weight journey, for example. The other area that I think is equally important is cellular health, because the health of our cells, methylation, detoxification, inflammation, our body's ability to deal with oxidative stress that we are exposed to, those four areas of cellular health is becoming really state-of-the-art area of self-care. That's what I'm seeing these days.
And I think people think about self-care as a luxury. A lot of, and I'm just speaking to women and probably my age demographic that we take care of all the people around us. And this is generally a lot of women do this as caregivers. We might, not everyone does, but many of us might be looking and taking care of whether it's your pet or whether it's, a
Yes,
sibling
absolutely.
or a child or an older parent or whatever. And so self-care seems like it's this luxury that I don't have time, I'll get to it. What do you say to your clients when you're working with them to shift that mindset?
Well, self-care is not a luxury, it's a necessity. If we think about in the airplane, we all travel for business, right? And I used to be on the road 4 days out of 5 every week for 6 to 8 weeks straight when I was the head of commercial operations for North America. And so you're in that seat, and the flight attendant is going to tell you to wait to put the mask on yourself first and then put the mask on your child or whoever is traveling with you. And it's the same with self-care. If we don't take care of ourselves, then we're not going to be there for our loved ones in the way that they need us to be there for them. How we take care of ourselves affects how we show up for others. And I think it's a really, really important realization.
I love that visualization of putting the mask on first. So what are some things that you've seen that really was a transformation? Like imagine it's me, because I'm probably in the worst case scenario. Like I'm always working. But there's a lot of women out there that are hearing this and are probably saying, yeah, I am, or, I'm driven, or I have all these reasons why I can't. And so what have you seen when you get your client to shift that and then start focusing on that? I love the cellular. I'd like to learn more about that, but what have you seen in terms of a transformation?
The way to think about it is to think about baby steps first, because it's very difficult to incorporate a lot of self-care into a week, right? And so it can feel intimidating. And that's where you kind of push it aside and say, I just can't do that. But when I was in the consulting industry, I used to have a partner who would say, inch by inch is a cinch, yard by yard is hard. And it applies to self-care as well. And so the thing to do is to think about, where can I begin to incorporate 15 minutes, like 15 minutes for stress resolution? Because the way that stress affects us, stress, when it is short-lived, is not a bad thing. Our bodies were designed to help us run away from danger. As far as our body is concerned, we're running away from a bear, right? There is a bear
Yes.
looking inside our car, and we run, 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 run. But the idea is that our body was then designed to relax afterwards. We escaped the bear, and now we can rest and we can relax. And then the physiological resources that were diverted to help us survive and run, 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 run as fast as we can, those resources will then go back to where they belong, to help our digestion, to help our detoxification, to deal with our reproductive health. That has to happen in order for that homeostasis, that balance, to be restored. We have to rest following that stressful event, right? So in physiological terms, it means that we have to shift from sympathetic state into a parasympathetic state. The problem in today's world is we never shift. We just go from one stressor to another. We go from bear to tiger to lion. There is never a break. And so in order for us, the first thing that we have to think about strategically as far as self-care is concerned is, how do we insert into our day those moments where stress resolution can take place so that we can restore ourselves?
I think that stress resolution, I love that idea because I find it so helpful to meditate, take out 12 to 14 minutes to meditate.
That is so important, because those 15 minutes that you're taking to meditate is when stress resolution
It
happens.
really does.
And the stress hormones, the body stops producing stress hormones. You restore in your balance, your homeostasis, and you allow in the body to shift into a parasympathetic state. And once you're in that parasympathetic state, you can go and have dinner. Because now that your body is back in a parasympathetic state, you go and enjoy your meal, your body will actually be able to digest your food and then get the nutrients from that food that you require for physiological health, because we need those nutrients for all major metabolic processes. And when those nutrients are not happening, when we're not digesting the food properly, and that when we're not absorbing those nutrients, then our body doesn't have the cofactors, as we call them, or the participants in major metabolic reactions that need to happen.
What have you seen in terms of women at that senior level? And that's who you and I work with, similar demographic. And you've built up this long time of doing it in one way, and then that shift. And you talked about those small steps. When they've made those small incremental steps, how are they feeling?
Well, what happens is, in order to succeed in making those steps, I always tell people, just do 1, 2, or 3 things, no more than that, over the next 2 weeks, because any more and it'll become overwhelming. And of course, a bunch of us are overachievers, right? So we want to do a lot more than that. But in order for it to work, we do 1 or 2, 3 at the most over a 2-week period, and really experiment with what works. And what works will then become integrated into our day and into our self-care. And then 2 weeks later, we'll do the next thing and the next thing. And then before we know it, over a period of 6 months, we've built a very personalized, very nurturing, very supportive self-care program that's already part of day-to-day life. So in terms of how do my clients feel, we feel much more energized. We feel clarity of mind and ability to have that focus and concentration, which is so important, especially when we just get bombarded by so many demands on us in terms of media and information and social media. There is a lot of now demand on our focus and concentration. And so it's really important to have that positive attitude, ability to be centered, and to approach any problem in a sort of a calm, centered way where we don't feel overwhelmed. Those are all the benefits of that kind of lifestyle.
We've been talking about taking on that one step. And I know for me, there's one negotiable I never deviate from 100% of the time. The first thing I do when I wake up is work out, without exception. I don't think of it as self-care. I think of it as mandatory care that I have to, and it doesn't have to be like necessarily doing, a HIIT workout, although I do those, but I always, I do variety and do different things, but I always, always, always start my day every day. And if there's one thing that you could suggest to our listeners to think about, and it doesn't have to be what I just said, how can you do that first step?
Well, I generally say that the very first thing that I like to work with people on is their sleep. Sleep and getting 7 hours, at least 7 to 8 ideally, but at least 7 hours of sleep is really, in terms of the impact it's going to have on the health, it's big, really big. Because there's been studies that show, there was a study, I think it was MIT where that study was done, but some time ago there was a study that demonstrated that even 8 days of just getting 6 hours of sleep will trigger the immune system to produce an inflammatory response. And that creates a state of low-grade inflammation, which puts people on a path to chronic illness. And so getting those 7 hours of sleep is just so very important. And the other factor that we have to remember is that between 10 p.m. and 2 to 33 a.m. in that time frame is when the slow wave phase of sleep dominates. And it's in that deep sleep, deep state of sleep that our body does a lot of renewal and restorative practices, like detoxification, like lymphatic drainage, adrenals get renewed, cell renewal happens. And when we go to bed late, we shortchange ourselves on that. Because if you go to bed at midnight, that process will not continue past 2:30, 3 o'clock. Because at 3 o'clock, the REM phase of sleep will start dominating. And there's going to be a lot of brain activity and dreams and things like that. So the slow wave phase of sleep will no longer be dominant. And so if we want to really give our body and position our body for success, then getting to bed by 10 and giving ourselves 7 hours of sleep, that's, to me, the number one thing people can begin doing right away. And that doesn't require a lot. It just requires a decision to begin to transition ourselves to it. And people would say to me, well, Rina, I really can't fall asleep that early. I'm a late night. I go to bed at 11, 11:30. Well, I used to go to bed at 11, 11:30. And now at 9:30, I'm half asleep already. And by 10, I'm asleep. I'm in bed. It's just when we're executives, the lifestyle conditions us to go to bed late. I used to get to my hotel room at 10 o'clock at night, right? And then I'm still catching up on emails. And before I know it, I'm up till midnight. And the brain is overstimulated frequently, and it's 1 o'clock before you're asleep. And those are challenges that we have to work our way through, right? We have to sort of allow our body to unwind and recondition ourselves to realign the natural rhythm of our body with the rhythm of nature. Because there is such a thing called circadian rhythm. And these days, there is quite a lot of conversation about it in the media. But the closer our body's rhythm is aligned to the rhythm of nature, the more in balance we will be and the healthier we will be.
I have one last question because I know this might be, at least in our members are going to have this, because we talk about it in Next, which is one of our groups in our masterminds, that there's insomnia that happens. So even if someone were to go to bed by 10, around 2 to 3, and especially if you're in menopause or post-menopause, especially, there's this time where you just wake up and that's it. Like you cannot get back to sleep. What are some things that you tell your clients that you're working with that are like, okay, I know if you wake up at this time, here's some things to do to ensure that you're still able to turn it back and then continue on? Because that's the thing. You don't want to disrupt that sleep. And then even if you got those first 5 or 4.
It's a real issue, right? Especially in menopause, it's a real issue. There are 3 things that can affect us waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and not being able to go back to sleep. The first thing is our body could be stressed out. Cortisol, if at that point, cortisol is the stress hormone, if the body is producing more cortisol than there should be, then it'll make it more difficult for us to fall back to sleep. There is potentially, there could be an imbalance of neurotransmitters also, not enough GABA, too much glutamate, right? And that can create a similar problem. Or there could be histamine. 3 o'clock is a known time for body to dump a bunch of histamine out. And histamine is another neurotransmitter that's very excitatory. And so I work with clients to determine, well, what's causing? We start looking to see, well, what is really making it, which of these is, or sometimes it's a combination, is causing this issue. So, and then getting to the bottom of it is really then helps alleviate the issue. But in terms of practices, the first thing I would tell people is stay away from making lists. Don't wake up and start saying, okay, I need to do this and this and this and this tomorrow, because that guaranteed you'll not be able to fall asleep, because that kind of activity by itself will cause a stress response, and the body will begin to produce cortisol, and it will become a self-perpetuating factor. A better practice, if you're waking up at that time, is to begin to use something like a mantra practice. A simple mantra practice could be taken from any spiritual tradition that feels safe and giving the mind something to hold on to. The first time I read about that practice was from Ignat Ishwaran, who taught the first course in meditation at UC Berkeley. And he tells a story in India of an elephant going through a market. And if an elephant is walking through a market, the husk of the elephant will be grabbing various fruits, a coconut here, a mango over there, some bananas over there, and everybody will be unhappy. And so what the elephant's owner would do is give him a stick to hold on to, and the elephant will hold on to the stick, and he'll be busy holding on the stick, and he won't be grabbing any fruit. It's the same thing with our mind. If we give our mind something productive to hold on to, it's not going to be going various places, living a mind of its own. And so that's where Ishwaran introduce the idea of using a mantra. You're not necessarily going into a meditative state like during meditation, but your mind repeats the mantra. And when it's repeating the mantra, it's not thinking any of the stressful, troubling thoughts that would keep you up at night. It takes a while. I work with my clients and help them figure out how to integrate a mantra practice into their life, but it does work. It's one of the tools. Obviously, there are other tools that we can use, but it's one of the tools that has been very helpful in those types of situations.
I know this episode is going to be so helpful. Speaking of helpful to our listeners, and I can't wait for them to hear this. If people want to learn more about you and the amazing work you're doing and that you're describing today, where should they go to find you?
I think LinkedIn is absolutely the best place. I also would be glad to talk to them. I think my contact information is on LinkedIn. It also is on my website. My email address is irina@odysseysinToWellbeing.com. Very much enjoy connecting with people.
Well, it has been such a pleasure and delight to have you here on the show today. Thank you for being here. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you, Natalie. Likewise.
Thank you for spending your time with us today. I hope that this episode helps you focus on the one thing, sleep. I know that I personally do not get enough sleep. It really resonated with me. At the time of this episode, we will have already had a program in her C-suite with Irina focused around gaining our competitive advantage and how can we leverage that. So I'm excited that she has been a speaker for us in our community. She is also a member of Women Leaders on the Move, so you can gain access to her in her C-suite. I hope that you will visit us at hercsuite.com and learn more. And I would be so honored if you would rate and review this show. It's how people find us, and share this with a friend or colleague who needs self-care to help her gain that advantage in her work-life balance. Keep shining your light bright. The world needs you.